McCain Foods has moved its bean production to Hastings and spent $19 million upgrading the factory. Field manager Mike Flynn talks us through the changes that have been made.
The beans for us in Hastings are brand new. The last time beans were grown in Hawke's Bay area was probably about 14 years ago. That's processed beans. They had a frozen vegetable plant in Tasmania which they've decided to close for varying reasons. Probably one that the plant was a bit old and needed some fairly serious upgrading sort of thing. So that in mind, and with the climate we have here in Hawke's Bay, and we've got a pretty good factory, quite a modern factory in Hastings, they decided to shift that whole operation to here. It was quite a learning curve. We're dealing with a different type of bean than we were when they were previously grown in this area sort of thing. The conformation of the plant is very different attributes to the plant, smaller bush, probably higher yields, so we're looking after all those sort of facets. We had to give some thought as to how we were going to work with that in regard to plant spacings, row spacings, the type of material we were using, different methods of, the likes of dropping out rows for spray rigs and for irrigation, which was one thing we had to consider. Because beans are very susceptible to fungus diseases later on in the season sort of thing, so being mindful of all that. Getting the contractors, start with the contractors on board, there's been some substantial investment for them. Our planting contractor, he put his hand up early in the piece and indicated to us that he was quite keen to come on board and be a part of the ramp up and the introduction of beans to the Hastings area.
After going to Tasmania and having a look how they did it there and watched what they were doing, came back and decided to go out and invest in a new planter. It's a very short crop, short season. The plant population is high, extremely high. Getting it right, throughout the period of time, you really just cannot relax. From the day the pips go into the ground to the time the harvester gets there. There's a lot of weed control, fungal control and everything else, and you just got to be onto it all the time. Within 2 months it's gone. One of the things that's exciting about going forward, and we've already realized that the row spacing can be brought in closer, which I think is a major plus for weed control, and I'll be able to put the pips further down the row if we can bring the weed spacing in. And the population, I think, if we can push the population without jeopardizing yield and the cost of the seed, which is horrendous, we should be able to improve the yields.
This year, if you look at the spring, we started off with a really poor outlook for cereal pricing, which has obviously turned around 6 months later. But at the time we couldn't get contracts that were even half reasonable. We looked at the gross margins. We've worked a lot with McCain's for the last few years, so it's a bit of help them out if they wanted to try something new. We initially went with 2 blocks of main crop, so that was, there was no crop prior to. And then they came back and said, oh, we need a bit more area. So we said, well, you might be able to sneak some area after peas, because this would generally go into winter wheat, so it's sort of a bit of a gap in the middle. And the lamb market was looking pretty strong, so we weren't too fussed about, having everything in for lamb feed. So with that in mind, we sort of went with that plan, and then as the season progressed, they needed more and more area, so we ended up expanding out. And the other thing we had was they told me we had to cultivate everything, and I said, well, that ain't happening. So it's strip till or nothing. So we were told, well, we could do a trial with strip tillage, and so our area was quite reduced. But I think we're up to 80 hectares now, which is not a bad trial. If you can't get good yields, you're not going to make good money. But if you can get good yields, and we got a very good yield out of the peas in these blocks, and then we put a good bean yield behind it, we'll probably look at grossing off this paddock, for instance, will probably gross hopefully nearly $8,000–9,000 a hectare out of 2 very short growing seasons. 68 days for beans and maybe 90 to 120 for the peas. So that's actually not, that's sort of up there with returns.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.